Anyone that is 3D printed with a material other than PLA or ABS surely has run into issues with moisture from time to time. Now, if you primarily print with nylon, then you firsthand know what a negative impact that having damp or wet filament can have on your print success. From ugly prints to just downright failures, having moisture in your filament is a terrible thing. Over the past year, I've played around with a couple of different filament drying solutions, from a repurposed dehydrator that worked fairly well to an inline dehydrator that had little to no effect on the printed parts at all. And I recently gave the dehydrator to a buddy of mine because I'm moving and I need to downsize a bit, and it took up quite a bit of space, and he's had quite a bit of issues with printing a PTG due to moisture, so I figured that he certainly could get use out of it. Now, where I live in Southern California isn't very humid, so the only use I have really for a dehydrator is if I occasionally print with nylon, or if there's a PETG spool that has been open for a very, very long time, then perhaps it has absorbed some moisture and is in need of being dry. So for me, all I really need is some kind of a compact solution that is just there for an occasional spool when the time arises. That's why when SUNLU reached out to me about their FilaDryer S1, which was a compact filament dryer, it really seemed to fit the bill. And being that they are a filament manufacturer, I was already kind of a bit more reassured that these guys know filament. They manufacture it, so certainly they're gonna know what it takes to make sure that the filament is dry. So in this video, we're gonna take a look at the FilaDryer S1. We're gonna talk about some of the features that the device offers. We're gonna dry some filament, and of course, we're gonna do some 3D printing. So we'll do some printing with spools before being dried and then after being dried, and then we will compare and contrast and see how much of a difference this dryer actually makes. I hope you guys are excited. Let's get right into the video. Design-wise, the S1 looks great. It's a fairly simple design dryer. It's got a hinged top clear plastic lid and a solid white plastic base. It's got a fairly large heating element that lines most of the bottom of the dryer. It's also got a insulated foam on the white portion of the plastic on the left and the right to help keep heat in. It's got two inlet/outlet ports for the filament. There's one on the top of the device and there's one on the front of the device. The back of the machine just has a power input, and the front of the machine has an LCD screen that will display some information and allow you to make some adjustments to the dryer. Now, by default, when you turn on the machine, it will run for 6 hours. It'll heat up to 50 Celsius. It'll show you the temperature on the front as it's climbing, and it'll show you the current temperature. So once those 6 hours are up, it'll go into sleep mode. By pressing the left button for 3 seconds, you can wake it up and it'll essentially run for another 6 hours. But you do have the ability to adjust these settings as well. So 50C is the default, but the range that you can adjust it to is from 35C to 55C, so you do have a little bit of wiggle room if you've got a material that doesn't require such high heat to be dried out, or if you've got one that needs a little bit more heat, then you can crank it up to 55C. You can also adjust the extent of time that this machine runs for from 0 to 24. So 0 being no time at all. If you set it to 0, it'll automatically go into sleep mode, and 24 will be 24 hours, which is the longest extent of time that you can have the machine before it does go into that sleep mode. Adjusting is very easy. The left is going to be the down arrow, so if you click that, that will lower the temperature. Right will increase the temperature, and if you hold the left arrow for 3 seconds, it'll then transition over to time, and then you can do the same thing where the right arrow will bump up the time by 1 hour, the left arrow will bump the time down by 1 hour. So the menu is really easy to use, and again, there's only 2 things that you're adjusting. It's time and temperature, so it's simple and it's effective. It works great. The little manual that comes with the FilaDryer S1 has some recommended temperatures for various materials. The midpoint for most of them is 50C, which is why that's their default temperature that it will go to when you turn it on, and that's actually what I used for the nylon as well as the PTG. They do recommend to dry out the spool for 3 to 6 hours before actually printing with it to ensure that you've gotten out any existing moisture. So for all of the spools that I dried out, I did dry them for the entire 6 hours. I wanted to make sure that I was giving them the best chance possible to show me what it was like printing before drying and show me after it had dried for 6 hours. So that is what all these prints have gone through. Also, for all the tests, I only used filament that had been open for a very long time, at least 6 months or longer. I used the exact same slice settings for the pre-dried and post-dried materials. I just went ahead and printed out the part, dried out the spool, loaded it back into the machine, and hit print again. So the G-code's identical, and absolutely zero post-processing is done. I wanted to show as close as possible to see really if there was and what the difference would be between the original wet filament and the dried filament that again had been sitting for 6 hours. So for the first print, I went with some Red Pet G that I've had open for about 6 months now. I went ahead and found a model of, it's a shoe mount. So basically you drill it into something and it allows you to mount your shoes. I thought it was kind of neat, and I downloaded that, I sliced it in Cura, and I went ahead and printed out the first part. It was roughly a 6-ish hour print. And then I went ahead and put the spool in the dryer at 50°C. I dried it for 6 hours, and then I fed it into the Artillery Genius printer, and I hit print again. And when I took it off, I put the two side by side. I looked at them from all angles, and honestly, from the part quality to the little bit of ghosting or ringing on the part, they were identical. I really couldn't see any difference. I'll post some photos so you can see for yourself and kind of make that judgment call. But to me, holding them both up to the light and looking at them, I didn't see any difference, which I was a bit sad about. I was really hoping to see some difference in the parts, and I did not at all in the first print. So for the second print, I went ahead and tried out some nylon that's been open for at least a year. I went on Thingiverse and I found an automatic mini blinds opener and closer, and so I went ahead and printed out the housing for that in the nylon. I used glue stick for bed adhesion, and I went ahead and hit print with the wet nylon, and the first thing I noticed was that when it was laying down, it didn't seem to be sticking very well to the bed. And after that, it seemed to kind of correct itself after a few different layers, and overall the part turned out quite well. I then went ahead and dried the nylon and printed that same part again, and with the dried nylon, it did seem to have much better first layer adhesion. If you actually look at the part, you can see where the first layer had slightly shifted before drying, and after drying, it seemed to lay down much cleaner. So the main difference I noticed was with the first layer. Again, it seemed to have better adhesion once it had been dried out versus the wet filament. Holding it up to the light, it looks like there's some slight differences between the two as far as the quality goes, but it's pretty minimal. Most of the difference I saw was actually in how well it stuck down in the first layer. So that was nylon. So after printing out those two parts, one thing I'd realized is that neither of those parts really had much retraction, and I wanted to see between a non-dried and a dried filament how they would handle a retraction. So I figured what better print to do than an actual retraction test. So I found online just a retraction model that's just 9 pillars. I went ahead and loaded in some white PTG, also been open for about 6 months, and hit print. Overall, the part turned out pretty good, but on the last pillar, there was about 5 strands of filament kind of coming off of it that was clearly a result of retraction. And I went ahead and dried out that spool and printed it again, and there was only one little strand coming off the end of it. So it did make a difference with the retraction. And again, if you had a model that was being printed with that PTG that was very retraction heavy, like maybe some kind of like Veroni STL or some kind of mesh, then I really do think that with this PTG, the dryer made quite a difference. And again, I know in the pillar test it's quite small, but these are with the exact same filament and the exact same G-code, and you can see that there is definitely a difference between it being dried and it not being dried. And like I had mentioned originally, I am in Southern California. If you are somewhere like Florida or in another state that's got a lot higher humidity levels, then I would anticipate that those differences would be magnified at least a couple of times, so it would be a more extreme difference. But it does seem to me that this dryer is at least doing something that is a step in the right direction, which is great. Overall, compared to the things that are out there on the market specifically targeted for 3D printing filament dryers, I've been really pleased with the FilaDryer S1. It does fit just about all of my single kilogram spools. There is one TPU spool I have and one PTG spool that it's 1 kg that I have that's really, really wide, and it does not fit in there, but most all of your standard 1 kilogram spools, or of course smaller, will fit in here without any problems. If there was a gripe or two that I have with this machine, I did want to mention that inside of the machine, the filament's actually sitting on these 2 rollers that can rotate, but there's either no bearings on the side of them, so they're free rotating, or the bearings just aren't very good. I do wish that there was better bearings on the inside where the filament rollers are. This would be a really easy fix, but what it would mean is that when your extruder is having to pull the filament, those bearings would help with the rotation and it would put less force on your extruder. Now, I didn't see any negative impact of this. It didn't cause the head to not be able to move, and I'm sure it'll be fine for just about everyone, but I would like to see some bearings added to those rollers just to give the filament a little bit easier time to spin freely inside of the dryer. The other thing is that on the product listing as well as on the box, it shows the LCD screen as being black with pretty bright blue text. Well, at least on the device I got, the screen is actually gray with with pretty dim black text. It's still totally readable. There is a backlight built into it, but it definitely doesn't match up exactly with what you see on the product listing. Now, I'm fine with the gray on black. I just think that they should update it to at least reflect that, because if somebody's anticipating these bright numbers, then you will be disappointed, because you do have to look at it and you can, again, clearly see it. It's in a darker room, it's very bright because of the backlight, but when I had both of my bright lights on, there was a couple times where I had to kind of look from the side just to see what the temperature was set to. So that was something that was definitely worth noting. I will say that for someone like me, again, that doesn't need a dryer all the time, I don't print with a ton of hydroscopic materials, but in my stars or in my future, I do plan on doing quite a bit more nylon printing. Having this around is going to be really nice, even if, again, it only gets used once a month or every other month. This is a very small dryer that would look good on anyone's workshop, and like I said, it doesn't take up too much space, so that is one huge plus over some of the other dryers that I've seen out there. But if you guys do want to find out more or purchase one for yourself, links will be in the description. At the time of making this video, it was out of stock on SUNLYU's website, but the price was on sale for around 60 bucks. So I anticipate that's about the price range that you'll be able to find this at, which to me is really solid. 60 bucks for a filament dryer seems incredibly fair to me. So if you have any other questions, let me know in the comments down below. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more great videos. I make a video every single Saturday, so there's always fresh content coming your way. And if you want to support the channel more so, links will be down below to my Patreon, where there's some really awesome rewards, and it helps me to get awesome, cool stuff to show you guys on this channel and spend more time doing what I love, which is making content for you guys. On that note, guys, thank you so much for watching. This has been Daniel from ModBot, and I am out. Peace, guys.